Well, welcome to another episode of the Residential Developer Podcast. I'm the host. My name's Nathan Battishall. We're going to continue on with our month of mindset. Today, I want to talk about an interesting topic when it comes to investment and development, and anyone that's been in and around it or part of different groups or meetups, there's so many that happen around Australia, is dealing with this element of why most people talk about development, but they never start. Now, I remember speaking at a meetup probably 8 years ago. About 8 years ago, I went to this meetup. I get invited to a few of these meetups just to talk about everything investment development. Obviously, from my point of view, the entire approval management, design, basically get that project to the point where it's ready for construction. And I remember going to this particular meetup, and I think it was in Parramatta or somewhere in Western Sydney, and about 8 years ago, and met up with some people. And I just remember a couple of people sort of coming up, and then off the back of that meetup, asked me a lot of questions, like helping them sort of navigate questions. They were looking to do a project, looking to, do some townhouses, often things like that. And just sort of over a period of months, sort of helping answer questions and just give some value and support. And because, like I said last episode, it's important when you're part of a community to give out. Be someone who gives out, gives knowledge, gives education, gives help, gives support, answers questions. Don't just be a taker. Fast forward then 7 years. So last year I went to a meetup in a similar area, and I saw a couple of the same people there that were there 7 years prior, or 8 years now prior, and they still hadn't pulled the trigger on a project for all different various reasons. And this isn't to have a crack at those sort of people, but for me, there is a mindset of pulling the trigger on something of, when do you have too much education? When have you done enough education? Like some people spend their whole life wanting to do something, but never having the ability or the sense to go out and pull the trigger on something. And I guess it just made me sad in a lot of ways to see that, some of the most passionate people in this property space, in a lot of ways, yes, 7 years down the track, are probably more knowledgeable, likely more educated, but were no further ahead in pulling the trigger. And in that same space of time, I remember talking to other people who are far less educated, far less knowledgeable in that space, who've done multiple projects and pulled the trigger and action projects and been able to really take a step out. And I think that's the thing is, there's so many different invisible barriers, and I just want to, there's so many invisible barriers that stand in the way of us, the difference between us doing a project and not doing a project. And the reason why I call them invisible barriers is because they're barriers that we see them as a barrier, but often they're invisible because they're barriers that actually, in a lot of cases, can be overcome. But I think a lot of it comes down to a mindset and overcoming some of those barriers so that we can push ahead and we can advance, and so that we can pull the trigger on those projects. And that's, I guess, a dream of mine, is to see less people 7 years down the track through these educational meetups and different development sort of meetups that happen all around Australia, which are terrific, mind you. See less people who are 7 years down the track and have so much knowledge, but I guess one of the challenges is they sort of float to the next big thing or the next idea or the next opportunity and don't become sort of specialised in something and don't get the privilege and the opportunity to actually apply and put application and legs on the learnings to actually execute a project and to pull the trigger. So I want to just talk about 5 physical barriers, and there's probably hundreds of physical barriers, but for time's sake, I just want to talk about 5 physical barriers that I believe are key things as to why people, they talk about development, but they never start. And I think one of the biggest ones is fear. One of the biggest barriers, I think, that stops people from doing a project, stepping out and doing a project, is fear. Fear's obviously a real feeling. It's a real thing. And it's actually good to have an element of fear, because fear enables you to do your due diligence, to do your checks, to cross-check things, to get wisdom around you, to get ideas and that sort of thing. But fear can also cripple people, where everyone's got different experiences in life. They may have seen a loved one, or they may have seen a family member, or maybe their parents or previous generation lose everything. So there's a fear of losing it all. There's a fear of, what if it doesn't work? There's so many elements that bring about fear when it comes to executing a project. But the thing is, if you don't deal with the fear element, you'll likely never pull the trigger on a project. If you don't harness that fear and turn that into the ability to go and pull the trigger and to do a project, you'll constantly be too afraid to do that. And I'm sure all of us have been in settings where we haven't done something out of a fear of failure, a fear of it not working, a fear of what if it doesn't work, a fear of how will I bounce out of it if it doesn't work. And, I talked last episode, we spoke about having a mindset of resilience. And, one of the ways resilience is strongly built into a human being is through actually overcoming fear, is actually to sometimes take a few knocks and be able to get back up and to go again. And I think, look, like I said, you want to harness fear. You want to use some of it to your advantage so that you don't make unwise decisions, so that you don't make decisions that are rash, irresponsible. But the reality is, a lot of times we spend too much time in the story, like the case I shared before, 7 years where someone had the finances, had the ability, had the knowledge, had all those things in place. And sometimes one of the things that can hold people back is fear, too afraid to pull the trigger. And, I say to people, if you're too afraid, just do something small. And I'm a big advocate for starting something small. Even just do a flip, do a renovation, do something. Do something that's small and risk-free so that you can really get some confidence out of that, so that you can actually get a victory. Because I think a lot of people, they almost talk themselves out of doing something because they've never had that sense of victory and that sense of being able to action something. There's something to be said of actually being able to look back and say, look what we were able to achieve. So often when I see someone wanting to pull off a 6 townhouse development or 4 townhouses for their first project, I think like some people have that ability. Some people have the complete opposite, where they've got just absolute extreme courage. And some people have got the capital to be able to bounce out if it doesn't work, go to plan. But even people with, I guess, reasonable wealth, I'm big on just pull the trigger on something small, something risk-free, something very highly risk-free with multiple exits, multiple opportunities to be able to pivot and shift and move. And look, if you're really gripped by fear, do something really small. Like it could just be for your own primary place of residence. Just decide to find a property that you can add some instant value to it, or some value over a period of time, execute it by doing that renovation or adding that additional couple of bedrooms or adding a garage, a second living, something that's going to, in time, add some value. But it's what it's going to do. Yes, you may not make a whole heap of money out of it. You might just make some money, but by doing that, you're gaining experience, but you're actually becoming an action taker rather than someone who's sitting on the fence, too afraid to get in the game and partake in the game. So for me, that's a hugely key one. One of the invisible barriers often that stand in front of us doing a project and not doing a project is fear. So if you've got fear, come up with a plan. Come up with a plan of, okay, why have you got that fear? And what are some ways you can negate that fear? And what's that fear? Why is that fear real, or is that fear just something that's just literally a blockage that's stopping you from pushing into your destiny of what you're supposed to be doing when it comes to projects? And if it's a real thing, if you don't have a lot to risk, if you might be hugely risk adverse, if you're putting a lot on the line, be smart, be wise, don't make silly decisions. Don't make decisions that are going to jeopardize family, your relationship, your kids, all of that sort of thing. Like, be wise about what you do. But if you're someone who's very, very risk adverse, just start small. But even if you're someone who is full of courage to push into something, do something small. Get a victory out of it. And then maybe just go again, do something similar. And all of a sudden, like in 7 years, you could be someone who's pulled off a couple of projects. You can look back, you can learn from it, you can grow your capacity, your ability to do things. And all of a sudden, like, you can be someone who you could have spent 7 years too afraid to do anything, or you could have, in that period of time, you could have actioned a few things. Maybe it's getting an investment property and putting a granny flat on the back. It doesn't have to be pulling the trigger and doing 4 townhouses, 6 townhouses, 10 townhouses, a detached dual lock. Like, it could just be something small. So one of the invisible barriers is fear. Second one I want to talk about is finance. Obviously, finance is a key thing, because without finance, it's really hard to pull the trigger on a project. But I find a lot of people, they talk about a project but never do it because they don't have the finance. Now, we live in a world now where there's so many ways to do projects, even when you don't have a whole lot of finance. I always say, would you rather a percentage of something or a percentage of nothing? If you know that you're passionate about property and passionate about projects and passionate about developments, there's a lot of people out there with high wealth that have the ability and the capacity to do projects. There's things like JVs and opportunities to get investors, and there's so many things out there. There's even, there's even investor groups out there and some really good educational courses of how you can do projects with no money down. But I think there's all different types of things. You can option properties, you can flip properties, there's so many things you can do out there. But one thing I've found, that when I've met people that maybe go and do educational courses, I remember doing one about 10 years ago, really good educational course. And I reckon half the guys doing that course, they would just love property, but they're just stuck in their life. Maybe things didn't work out, took a massive hit, no finance, maybe something went belly up. So they're sort of on the comeback or on the bounce back. And I love that. I love being in that space, because you get a lot of hungry people to go and who want to go and execute and do projects, but a lot of them know that they don't have the means and the ability to bounce back. And I've been there myself, where I've taken hits, where it impacted things like credit ratings and various things earlier in my adult life, where I had to lick my wounds, where I couldn't get into the property space because of bad decisions I made in my early 20s that impacted me sort of through to my late 20s and early 30s. Where you had to be creative, you had to have a way forward. But the challenge with a lot of people is they get a dream, they have a dream of doing a project, but they don't have the funds, they don't have the finance, and the one of the biggest problems is, one of the biggest things that I think is that invisible barrier of finance, is because people don't have a plan. If you don't have the finance, then you need to come up with a plan. So without a plan, you're not going to be able to action that project. So what will happen is, if you don't have a plan, you don't have a North Star, you don't have a direction forward, you don't have a way forward, and it needs to be a plan. For some people, it may need to be a 10-year plan. For some, it might be a 5-year or a 2-year or a 12-month plan. But if you don't have a plan, you'll get to the next year and be not much further ahead than what you were the previous. Because if you don't have a plan, you're not going to be able to move forward. Without a vision, people cast off restraint. They perish. Without a vision, without a forward direction, people generally stay stagnant, or they don't have something to aim for and something to strive and push towards. And I think that's just such a hugely key thing. Okay. And there's so many things out there now that you can start to push into. Go and talk to some mortgage brokers. Go and talk to some investor groups. Go and talk to some high wealth individuals. Go and talk to some developers and see if they need a hand. Maybe they need a hand acquiring some sites. Maybe if you're passionate about development, you can do some development management. There's so many things you can do to get some skin in the game and to get yourself out there. And, once you develop a plan, once you've got an idea of the type of project you can afford, you can do, you can then execute. It's no point sort of educating yourself highly around doing a 4-pack of townhouses when you can only get the funding to do a detached dual lock by keeping a house and doing one more house. You're putting all that energy, all that effort into doing 4 townhouses when you do not have the finance or the capability to pull the trigger on that project. So you can spend 4, 5 years just building yourself up into that space and you're not there yet. Whereas if you've got a plan, you've got an understanding of, okay, I've got the ability to do this type of project. I had a client who they had the capacity and the ability to buy a property with an existing house on it. The idea for them was to live in that house and then get some private money to build another house, subdivide, sell the older house, then they live in the other one, for a period of time for tax purposes, but also the ability to do the project. And then you'll get someone well-meaning that will say, well, they're paying a lot of interest on if they're using private money to do that new house at the back. And that, rightly so, that may be the case. But as I said, do you want a percentage of something or a percentage of nothing? This is what I love about there's some people out there who have that mindset of saying, you know what, I'd rather have a percentage of something than a percentage of nothing. And if they run their numbers right, they're running appropriate numbers on their interest, they're factoring in time, they're factoring in delays, they're factoring in all those things. The reality is they may not be able to get bank money for that back dwelling. So all of a sudden they can just spend their whole life procrastinating and never pull the trigger on anything. Or they can say, you know what, this is my entry point. This is my opportunity to step into that space. I'm going to use all the education that I've been given. I'm going to run appropriate numbers. I'm going to do things appropriately so that I can do this project, pull the trigger, knowing that this is just the start of my future. This is the start of my journey, my investment, my development journey, because they understand that they'd rather a percentage of something than a percentage of nothing. And I think that's one of a big key thing as to why people don't pull the trigger or never pull the trigger on a project, because they don't have a plan. And when you develop a plan, you've got an understanding of your ability, your borrowing capacity, or whether you need to JV, or whether you need to bring in help or support, or whether you even want to do that. And then you've got a plan. And once you've got a plan, you can execute that plan. Like, I'm amazed when I see different guys that have sort of their 10, 20-year plan of the type of projects they want to do. And they're often the people that do carry out those and execute on that dream, because they've got a plan, they reverse engineer it, and they work towards it. So the other thing I think that causes people to never start projects, I think, is comparison. Comparison's a massive killer in our world, and we've all been there. I've been there, where you look at people that are successful, you look at what they've achieved and what they've done, and you try to compare your journey to their journey. And what happens is when you compare yourself to someone who's a lot further advanced or a lot further ahead, maybe has more ability, more capacity, more borrowing capacity, more education or more knowledge, you start to shrink down what's in you. You start to shrink down who you are. You start to shrink down your ability. You start to shrink down the very thing that makes you you. Because the reality is we don't need two of the same person in this world. We need you to show up. The world needs you to turn up at 100% of the capacity of what you've got within you. Because when you're 100% authentically you, when you're your healthiest true self, you'll bring great things into the world. So I think comparison is a killer, because comparison will make you spend all your time, all your energy striving to be something that you're not. Comparison will cause you to spend all your time and all your focus, all your energy pushing to be something you were never supposed to be. And when you're comparing yourself to someone who's a lot further ahead, you don't realize you only see the Instagram reels. You only see the successes. You don't see the hardships. You don't see the difficulties that's made that person what it's made them. You haven't seen the blood, the sweat, the tears. You haven't seen the stressful nights. You haven't seen the near misses. You haven't seen the fatal, breakthrough, the fatal last minute breakthroughs they had to get to where they got. You haven't seen the education, the late nights. You haven't seen the hard work. You haven't seen all the different things different people have had to do to achieve what it is they've achieved. So comparison's a killer. It's important to never compare yourself to anyone else. Yes, gain inspiration from people around you. Gain inspiration from their wins, from their success, from their strategies of how they did things. But the worst thing you can do is compare, because comparison will just grip you with fear. It'll grip you with it'll grip you with a mindset of just, I'll never have enough. I'll never be good enough. I'll never do enough. And often you're comparing yourself with someone who has maybe a lot more resource in their hands than you do. And it's unfair to compare yourself with someone who is more heavily resourced, maybe has a lot more experience, has a lot more backing behind you. And whereas when you pull off that comparison trap, when you pull off that comparing yourself to others, you start to just begin to appreciate and learn to love who you are. I think in Australia often we're not great, especially as Aussies, often we're not great at learning to love ourselves and love how we're wired. And maybe it's a worldwide thing, I don't know, but I think we've got to learn to be content in our own skin and to appreciate the strengths that we bring to this world and the abilities that we carry and we have. And like, you want to strive for more. You want to strive for excellence. You want to push towards that side of it. But you never want to push towards perfection, because perfection doesn't exist, because there'll always be better. There'll always be something better, someone better. Whereas if you strive for excellence, you wake up each day wanting to do things at a new level, at a high level, but it's less pressure because you're not pushing towards perfection. But for me, comparisons, it's a massive invisible barrier. It's a massive barrier that stands between people that do things and don't do things, because I find when people spend so long comparing, they start to aim for things that they're not capable of currently pulling off. There's nothing to be ashamed about in starting small. There's nothing to be ashamed about in starting something slightly different. You might see someone doing the most high-end development you've ever seen in the best suburbs in Australia, on the ocean, on the water in Sydney, or you might see someone doing oceanfront duplexes, or you might see someone just pulling the trigger on these amazing, high-end, high-spec'd up projects. And then all of a sudden you're in that comparison trap where you're wanting all the prestige, and it's all about how your image and how you want to look, and you think you're too good to do a lower spec product, or start off by maybe keeping a house and just doing one sort of mid-spec type project. And for me, that's the difference between someone who does something and doesn't do something, because people spend too much time comparing rather than just looking at what's in my hand, what have I got the ability to pull the trigger on now and pull it and do it, and just be content and excited and happy that you're actually able to do something. Because the problem is you strive to do something that you're not capable currently of doing, then you end up doing nothing. So you've made no progress and no step forward. So, have an attitude of not caring what people think. At the end of the day, this is your life. This is your choice, your life. And at the end of the day, people think about you less than you realise anyway. That's something I've learned so much in my life, that people aren't talking about me. People aren't thinking about me. We spend so much time caring what people think, whereas we need to just begin to just get a mindset of not caring what people think and just do with what's in our hand. If you've got the ability to pull a particular type of project off, pull it off. Don't worry about what the person down the road's doing. Don't worry about what the person on the same street's doing. Don't worry about what your colleague's doing, or don't worry about what your brother-in-law's doing. Like, focus on what you want to do. Focus on what you're able to do and do it. And you'll find that comparison trap won't be something that will stand in your way and hold you back from pulling the trigger on a project. Another big one is overwhelm. A lot of people become overwhelmed because they just see the process and they do not see a way forward. And I think overwhelm's a little bit similar to what I was talking about with finance, where a lot of people become overwhelmed because they don't have a vision. They don't have a vision, but more than a vision, they don't have a plan of how they want to carry out that vision. And I always find in my own life, times I become overwhelmed, it's because I don't have a plan and I don't take a step back to look at my plan, look at where I am on that plan and map out what I need to do to get to that next step. You know, a lot of people, they're just so destination focused, and I get it. Like, we live in a world now that's so instant that I talk about this a lot, that we're very destination driven people. That all we think about often is the destination. When we're doing a project, all we're thinking about is selling the product and making $200,000 or making $500,000 or $1.5 million. That's the destination. The destination is the goal. Or doing a development and keeping an unencumbered property, or doing a land subdivision and keeping 7 unencumbered sites, or whatever the destination is. We become so fixated and focused on the destination that we get overwhelmed in the process, because all we're doing is thinking about the end result rather than saying, what's the process? What are the steps involved in pulling the trigger? So I always say, like, get the end vision in mind. What's the end goal? What's the 10-year plan? What's the 5-year plan? What's the plan for this project? And just reverse engineer it backwards. What does it look like to get to that end result? And then just reverse engineer it, map it out, step it out, get the right people around you. Don't micromanage it. Get a great world-class team of people to help you execute that project. And once you've got it mapped and planned out and processed out, you just work backwards from there, and you'll find when you do that, you become less overwhelmed. I've seen most of the overwhelm I've seen, and even talking from my own life experience, most of the time I've become overwhelmed and I've seen people doing projects become overwhelmed is because they do not have a plan. So if you're someone who is overwhelmed, you haven't actioned a project, is because you're just too overwhelmed of where to start, go back and have a look. Do you have a plan? What does that plan look like? How detailed is that plan? Do you have it mapped out? Do you have the funds? Do you have the finances? Do you have the team? Do you have someone that can help you find a site? Do you have your design team? Do you have your planner? Do you have a builder that you can lock in? Do you have an area, a suburb that you know? Do you have an area that you know the numbers, you know they work, you know they stack up? Like, all those sort of things. Have your plan. Once you start to get your plan, you'll find you'll be less overwhelmed, because it's just, you're not looking at point 100. You're literally looking at what's my next step, rather than the finish line. It's just, you're just one foot after the other, one step after the other, and you're just focusing on what's my next step, what's my next step, what's my next step, what's my next step. And when you find yourself getting a bit overwhelmed, just take stock of where you're at. Okay, you've missed those couple of steps. Just go back those couple of steps. Okay, what's my next step? What's my next step? And you just keep moving that way. Overwhelm is a massive thing, I believe, holds so many people back from actioning and pulling the trigger on a project. And the last one I want to talk about just quickly is procrastination. Procrastination is another massive one, I think, that just holds people back from ever pulling the trigger or doing and partaking in a project. A lot of people just procrastinate. They spend too much time just overthinking projects. And I think, again, I'll come back to that story around the going to the meetups. You know, I find a lot of people, they just procrastinate. They get so fixated on one type of project. They see an ad on Instagram or on some sort of content, and they go, "Oh, I want to check out that type of project," and they'll all of a sudden pivot from wanting to do a detached dual lock to doing townhouses. Then they want to do NDIS. Then they want to go and do 3 townhouses. Then they want to go and do a project in Queensland. Then they want to go and they hear the market's good in Tasmania, so they want to go to Tasmania. Then they're educating themselves on Perth, and then they're looking at doing a boarding house, and then they're looking at all these different things, and they're just going around the mountain, around the mountain, around the mountain. You know, there's some people that procrastinate where literally they've done year 1 20 times. So they could be 20 years down the track, but they've literally done 1 year every single time for 20 years, and they're no further up the mountain, where they're just wandering around that mountain. They don't get to the peak of that mountain because of procrastination. And look, for me, again, procrastination comes because of a lack of planning. And a lot of these elements I've spoken about come down to as a result of not having a vision, not having an endpoint, and then not mapping and planning out, how do I get to that destination? And for me, with a lack of planning, with a lack of vision and a lack of where you want to go and what you want to do, you will procrastinate. You will look at the next shiny object. You will look at the next thing and you'll fixate on that. You'll spend all this time educating yourself where you know so many different development strategies in so many different areas in so many different states, but you've never pulled off a project because you procrastinate and you just move around in circles and you don't get anything done. So I think it's best just to pick an area that you're confident in, pick a development type that you're confident in, that you know you can execute, that you know is profitable, and just plan it out, come up with a vision, come up with a plan, and just pull the trigger on it. And you'll find by having that plan that whenever you start to get procrastinate, because reality is there's so much around it these days. The moment someone gets an incredible investment or development-based strategy, they'll build a business around it. They'll promote it. You'll get educated on it. It'll draw you in because you're passionate about property, and which is good. Like, there's nothing wrong with those things. But if it's at the expense of you being able to deliver your dream of doing projects and doing developments, you'll find the ability to push away procrastination will enable you to have a plan, to execute it, and to push ahead and to move forward. And you'll find that the people that do push ahead with projects are the people that have a plan. They have a plan of action and they action that plan out. They don't spend time going through those things. So, for me, there's so many invisible barriers. There's fear, finance, comparison, overwhelm, procrastination. They're 5 of many that exist and stand in front of us. But I heard an amazing story, and I want to wrap up with this, but I heard this amazing story quite a few years ago. It was a story about 2 particular type of fish that in the ocean, these 2 particular fish are sort of enemies in the ocean. And what they did, it was in a university in America, they put these 2 fish, these large fish, into this tank together. And basically one of the fish was a natural predator of the other fish in the ocean, in the natural habitat. And they got these 2 fish in this university to do some research, and they put them in this massive big tank together. And between that tank was this clear sheet of thick perspex or glass that separated those 2 fish. And the natural predator of that other fish in that tank, he obviously saw that other fish and he saw his opportunity to take out what was his and rightfully his in his own natural habitat. And what happened, he would take opportunities in that first couple of months, to try and take that fish out. And obviously every time he'd try and attack that fish, he would hit that clear barrier. But then all of a sudden something shifted and that fish realised that there was something standing between him and his future, or his destiny, or his ability, or his food in this case. There was a physical barrier between him and that prey. So what they did, these researchers, they removed that big sheet of glass. Now, for 2 years, those 2 fish, natural predator in the ocean, those 2 fish lived together barrier free for 2 years in that pond, and not once did that fish attack the other fish, who was a natural predator of the other fish. Not once did he attack that other fish. So essentially what happened, the barrier stood between him for such a time that he conditioned himself to believe that he had no opportunity to take out that fish that in the ocean would be his prey, would be his food, would be rightfully his to take. For 2 years they lived barrier free with no harm, no damage, no attack. And I say that to say this. A lot of times in our mindset, there are things that once were barriers in our life that we've become conditioned to expect that we'll never be able to accomplish those things because those barriers are preventing us from going after what's rightfully ours. In this case, developments and projects, and pulling the trigger on different types of developments, or at least pulling the trigger on a project. I think there's a lot of people out there that some of the barriers that you think are still barriers are no longer barriers, that they were lifted a long time ago. And I see a lot of people where they can spend 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, still afraid that there's that barrier between them going after what they truly want to do, when that barrier could have been lifted a long time ago, that it no longer exists because you've overcome that challenge, you've overcome that fear, maybe you've overcome that overwhelm, maybe you've all of a sudden developed a financial base where you can now pull the trigger. And I think a lot of it is actually deciding and determining that, hey, yes, there might be some barriers between me going after what I want to go after now, but barriers are there to be smashed down. You know, just because there's a wall in front of you and something that you want to step into and achieve doesn't mean that that wall can't be taken to with a sledgehammer. Doesn't mean it can't be taken to with a big ball and chain. It doesn't mean that something can't barrel that wall down, and that you've got that victory story to be able to inspire the next generation of investors and developers on how you're able to overcome that financial difficulty and pull the trigger on a project. How you're able to overcome that fear and worry and anxiety to action something, and you're able to pull the trigger on something small, and that then led to something bigger, and all of a sudden the dominoes began to fall down. And, you know, for me, mindset's key, and I hope this episode has been helpful for you. As usual, make sure you share, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next week.